this is an overview of the team process integration. Now, interesting note here, as I said, we wanted to get the software focus out of this, not because software is bad, but because people that weren't software engineers, other kinds of engineers, would often see the word software and close their eyes and say, oh, this must not be for me. This doesn't apply to the work I do. And in fact, it applies to all of the engineering and scientific work that we do that comes together to make a successful program and project. So we kind of took the lead of the back in the days when we were going from the implied software capability maturity model to the CMMI, which was the integrated applying to all engineering aspects, not just software. So a little tiny bit of history and background on why we did this and why the reasons we were doing it. So overview, we're going to look at a quick high-level overview cycle, overall cycle and individual plans, and what it means to be a self-directed team. So, of course, personal discipline is the foundation of a good project team. Every individual in that team needs to have some basic skills and capabilities. So sometimes discipline is a scary word, but that's really all we mean by that. You know, having these professional skills, capabilities. We're very good at these things in our own areas of expertise. And so a really good, successful team is going to be composed of everybody doing their best to understand their capabilities, figuring out what tasks they can do, and then tracking those to closure, bringing up things as the team does, either it's daily stand-up or it's weekly get-together, or whatever aspects and deviations teams apply to this to make it work for them very well. But this is all about everybody doing that and making the team better as an individual. So everybody kind of owns a part of making the project successful.
One of the things I really want to focus on is helping people understand what they can do and how fast they can do it. So in TPI, we really try to make sure that team members understand what they can do. That way they can say they know how big their plate is. And so when the whole entire team knows what they can do, then they can make a realistic estimate and be able to make that commitment. Thanks, Jeff.
Great, thanks, Brad. And yeah, we'll definitely get into more details on that. But yeah, this is just the overview. And again, I encourage everybody ask questions, make comments in the chat. Starting with a process framework, this is a basic definition of what a framework is, a good methodology, a lot of different words that are sometimes ambiguous or sometimes overlapping, but it's really something that lets a team and encourages a team to define steps in processes or methodologies that help them get the work done that they need to do. Often we'll work with teams ahead of a launch, but after they've had this basic training to help them develop, you know, we have steps for how we build software, but we may also have steps for how we build circuit boards or how we, you know, create red fuzzy bananas. Whatever the objective is, we'll sometimes work with teams as we're coaching them beyond this training, but helping them to identify this stuff. But framework of a process is really fundamental here, and we work with teams as they ask for it and help them out to help them put together their tailored methodology steps that build the products that they're looking to deliver. The TPI, of course, then is a deviation or actually an extension of the team software process. The team process integrated or integration is all about helping a team composed of cross-discipline, you know, software engineers, electrical engineers, mechanicals, and the list goes on. But those are classical, typical compositions of a lot of teams we work with that are building products driven by requirements from, you know, our sponsors and ultimately by the warfighters that help drive the products that we build in our case. So, it was, of course, designed. And now I don't want to read the slides to you, but really it's all about helping them perform at their best, at the right level of detail, so that they can know when they start something and complete it, they can take accountability for it, know it's done, keep tracking their ongoing planning, tracking of the plan rather, and be able to report success, and also raise their hand when they need help. Getting into some of the details we'll talk about later, so let me move on. But it's really for developing teams and maintaining teams. And what we mean by that is we do a lot of development of new weapon systems or updates to weapon systems that are usually a composition of both putting new products, our new skills and features into the products that the fleet has, as well as fixing problems. And so some teams have more of a balance of a lot of development with some maintenance. Some are totally maintenance teams, but they're following the same set of project planning and tracking skills to update stuff that's out there that just need those kinds of combinations of new features and bugs, defects, mistakes, etc., to be made. And then a large part of almost every team are their products. However, many teams have services. The performance resource team, the four of us ourselves, we apply this to ourselves, and we're mostly a service team. So every year we do a plan for the year of all the services we're going to do, supporting our teams, doing training like this module, and helping answer questions, etc. So products and services are both equally important aspects of why we use this process. The TPI strategy, if you're familiar with the original slides out of the team software process approach, these will be very familiar because a lot of it were saying great ideas. We were just taking the word software out or eliminating it or replacing it with systems or those kinds of things. But it's based upon, at a personal, individual level, giving individuals these skills of discipline, knowing how to measure and estimate, running their at quality. And of course, those are all included in the three major pillars that I mentioned earlier that we'll get into more deeply. But this is really the starting point that supports everything else. When we get into a team level, of course, team building, that's essentially a big part of what that planning launch event is all about, where the team will set its goals based upon the products it delivers. Various roles and goals will be established and given to certain people to lead. However, everybody on the team is helping contribute to all of those goals and making them happen. But we will establish those the go-to folks for that, help teams make that happen. Like we said, help them build the process steps that they need for the products that they're delivering. That sometimes will happen during those launch events. Sometimes we'll work with teams ahead of those to get that in place. It makes the team building, gives it a good start, hit the ground running, and makes these team building events, aka launches and relaunches, happen much more quickly. And finally, the ongoing teams meeting on a schedule, whether it's daily, weekly. They'll often use our coaching services to come in and help them with oversight on these aspects of running the team after the initial launch. That's what we call team management. What the SEI, I think, originally called it as well, but it's all about coordinating, communicating, seeing how we're doing plans versus actuals, and evaluating our risks on a regular basis. So the structure of TPI is pretty fundamental. That launch process, that planning event, kicks everything off in initial launch. So short projects usually that are under a year or within a year, 1 year boundary, they'll probably just do one of these. Many of our programs have projects that run over multiple years, so they will break this into components, often driven by some kind of a delivery schedule they may have with the initial or with the overall customer or stakeholder, which goes all the way down from the end product user, the warfighter, through their program offices, and then out to our field activities, like where we are in a place called China Lake, California. I don't know if we ever said that during our intros, but yep, we're in a place in the high desert. You certainly knew that. Anyhow, getting back to the topic, this is really about getting an initial set of steps. We'll show those steps shortly. And from that, we'll go into the management, the cycle of development of products and services. And then each one of those will work with the team to take a look at what has happened. Those retrospectives, as they're known across the Agile community, the TPI and its predecessor TSP, Team Software Process, were all considered parts of an agile way to break products into smaller parts and pieces and get quick feedback. This whole cycle is really a key part of that. And then cycling through, if it's more than a 1-year project, typically they're going to have cycles of launching and relaunching, as milestones are met, and as other things that may happen unplanned, like major changes to funding or requirements. What that leads to is really that kickoff phase with the relaunches, and then finally when a major product is completed, delivered, they'll do an overall project, again, retrospective, taking some of the fundamental data and discoveries, and then coming up with ways of making things like estimating based upon actual events and happenings, making future projects much better at the planning and tracking that they're doing. And so it goes. So we'll show some more details of that. And of course, a few more words, the launch, that starting process, it's so vital and important. These are not laws, but guidance for how we would encourage projects to view the launch. First of all, it's a major part of the work that they're actually doing. It's not some outside event that has nothing to do with the project being built. So it's very important that our teams and those individuals understand that planning is a vital part of development and producing the work. They are planned and tracked, just like during the development of the products and services that are being planned, and everybody on the team is encouraged to participate. That means sometimes some people may not be there or may miss some parts of it throughout the few days that they will spend there, but they're all engaged and they're all responsible for leading the team in their own various important ways, with those roles defined for who's going to lead each major aspect of running the team. So when do projects launch? Well, ideally they start their planning at the beginning of when they're giving requirements and funding to do the work. So beginning of that project and its first cycle. As I said, sometimes they will stop unplanned because there's been major changes, usually in things like requirements changes might be discovered during the project itself, and how something was not at all going to work out the way we thought. Hopefully that was captured in a risk and discovered that way. And also things like major changes to the amount of money that a team has, or they're told, hey, we have these additional requirements. Hopefully they'll say, and there's this extra money, how long is it going to take now? Sometimes our project teams, and we help them with this, need to make their sponsors understand that if you want more, it's going to cost more. But that's part of changing the culture, which is sometimes more challenging than all the technical aspects of what we're are primarily talking about today. So working with the people side of those aspects is key to this as well. Now, a launch also may occur, especially a relaunch, when new players are added to a team, and especially so when a key player or two has left the team. So they're going to learn the process as the team is established. They may even change some of those, but really we're going to get them integrated to understanding how the project does its business, and try and get the best agreement we can and move forward. The launch process, pretty fundamental. We start out with understanding what leadership or sponsors or both want in terms of the end product. Sometimes they need help in expressing that because they're not sure how to say it. They just say, here's a bag of money, here's a bunch of requirements, just go do it. We sometimes will help as coaches work with the sponsors and the leaders, and we'll make that clear to the members of the team that we're teaching this course to be important and vital members of the team that know that the ability to do that. But that's the launch process, including those folks, finding out what their goals are. And then from that, we go to the next box and we talk about what are the roles we need to have based upon the way we've run projects, any changes to that or deviations because of this project, if it's special. And then we do derived goals from the key goals that the sponsors and the leadership gave us for how the project itself and the team members want to check and see, are we headed the right way? Are we making success as quickly as we thought, and being able to report when we're in trouble sooner than later? Those are a couple of key blocks that are vital to the success of the rest of this process. And sometimes projects find they spend a lot of time here. They wonder why when they get to the end, they have a much better understanding of why that was so important. Just telling you some of the outcomes of what happens there. Finally, the team will start to move into the core of their planning process in this launch by coming up with strategies for, are we using the Big Bang Theory and we just build it all at once, put it together, and it works? Are we going to have, typically that's those 1 year or less kind of projects. But certainly projects that are going to go over multiple years are definitely going to come up with a way of breaking this out. Often it's driven by major milestones of the program has given to establish a project with. So they'll be planned in known delivery dates, and they will use that to strategize and come up with what are they building and in which cycle, and then relaunching the details for each cycle as they go along. That gets them into the really core, which is making that top-down plan. Here's the overall project, where we think things show up and in which of the cycles. And the other half of that, the bottom-up plan, is just the details of the upcoming cycle. But in there, we've swapped things from what the original TSP ideas were. And that is to, before we get into details of the next upcoming cycle, look at the aspects of quality. What do we know about history? Do we have history to base some quality planning on? If we do, we'll make adjustments, usually based upon the retrospective that was done from previous work. Otherwise, we'll come up with some starting numbers based upon typical stuff that our team will supply these teams about how they can plan the quality parts. And the quality module will get much more into this, as well as other places in this presentation. Finally, with a plan, overall project, details for the next cycle that's coming up, we'll now look at the plan and say what could go wrong, kind of a typical risk assessment of racking and stacking things into likelihood and the consequence of if that happens, what do we do about it? Writing some mitigation, assigning people that real key, basic fundamental aspects and done in a simple way. Talk about that. And then putting together presentations, often what we mean by a launch report. Depending on the nature of the program, it may be a meeting again that we're getting ready for to present that back to the people that were in the first box, leadership, sponsor folks, present it to them. Often in the world, especially in the last 2 years and a lot of stuff we've learned in the pandemic, we do this remotely, and maybe various subsets of those folks in maybe one or more meetings. Nonetheless, we want to present back to leadership, to sponsors, here's what you said to do, here's what we came up with, and get some kind of an approval. And then, of course, we'll want to look at the launch itself, do a little retrospective learning from it, and what did we learn, and how might we do a better job of planning a future launch cycle, such as what we've just talked about. And depending on the size of the project, as it indicates on the bottom timeline, for projects that are either very small or very experienced, this can be from hours to a few days. I know in the past we've had projects that have spent beyond a week, but typically nowadays, I think most of our projects were able to get this done in 2 or 3 or 4 days, depending on the maturity. I don't know if any of my teammates who are actually doing this recently more than I am want to chime in on that, but I think that's the case. Over.
Yeah, I think we had a little discussion in the chat. Jim McHale wrapped it up by mentioning that it takes about a day to plan out a month worth of work for a team as a back of an envelope. So
Yep.
we've got 3 months, about 3 days. Christiane and I have both done launches in a couple of half days with teams that are in the zone and are using the processes and doing the same job as previous cycles. So as you're doing a relaunch or replanning, it gets even shorter.
Yes. Very good. Thank you, Brad and Christiane. And yeah, Dave, Brad and Christiane are the ones that are primarily engaged in a lot of this effort. And Dave and I come in and help as we're tasked with other things that are in our realm. But yep, that's it for that launch cycle. Now, when we get into the idea of doing a launch or a set of launches, really it's all about breaking it into cycles as seen needed by the project, usually driven by outside influences from some stakeholders, major stakeholders about cycles, but also by the team itself in knowing, well, we want to build the basic, test it out, get it out there into some of the try it out aspects and or deliverables depending on the project. So the overall plan for the entire project, as I said previously, that's laid out at a high level. And then as we go along from cycle to cycle, we'll do those detailed relaunches, as we refer to them, for each cycle. And cycle can be anywhere from a few weeks to a few months. Or as I said, in the case of a lot of our one-year projects that get special funding, it expires at the end of the fiscal year. They'll often just do a single cycle. So varies across depending on the type of work, the length of the work being done, and so forth. Now, from that, the aspect of each key member of the program or project really breaks down to everybody based upon, as we talked about, their areas of expertise, their ability to know how the work is done, and familiarity with the steps in doing the work. They'll come up with what are sometimes referred to as work packages or pieces of product or service to establish, put in place, and deliver. And that's how a team will decide often how in each of those cycles, one to many, who's going to do which parts so that they can be assigned as the most effective, can do the most work most quickly. Sometimes that doesn't work out for the teams, as we'll see in some of the details later. One person may be good at everything and they'll put it all on their plate, and then they'll find out somebody has 2 years of work and everybody has a month or two of work, and they can't get the job done in the 6 months or a year or 2 years that they had planned overall, and especially by cycle. So it's a balance of who's best at this and what's best for getting the product out the door and helping each other as a team. Lots of detail on that. We'll get into some more of that in the details of the 3 pillars and so forth of what team process is. So individual plans, it's like using a house as a simple way of breaking out the idea of how do we go through this process at an individual level, as well as members of the team all helping to each other to figure out these basic 3 aspects of how big is the work, you know, whether it's software in lines of code or circuit boards and numbers of chips or other logistical aspects of a project, depends on each project. But how big is it? And therefore, based upon how big is it, how long will it take? Because there is some kind of a linear relationship. When you get into the details of proxy-based estimating or other kinds of estimating techniques, often it's a linear. The bigger it is, the longer it takes. And they can look at things like if it gets bigger, but it takes less time, they can question their own historical data and other aspects. And we'll see how that happens in a little bit. Of course, the personal framework of what steps will an individual take to build it, that often is in an agreed upon set of steps for building different parts and pieces of the kinds of work that the project is putting out. So software, they'll often have a standard set of steps, circuit boards, hardware, mechanical design, etc. And then, of course, individuals will have some variations on that theme, and that, of course, is encouraged. So, of course, we have the how big it is and how long it takes, the steps to do each of those different kinds of work, and then, of course, the 3rd major pillar, which is personal quality and having some idea of knowing how to find defects as soon as we can, when they cost less and when they're easier to fix. So we'll get into all those aspects in the major modules 3, 4, and 5 that are coming up next. So personal and team process are really about applying a set of steps, sometimes called workflows, distributing those tasks equally across the team, often driven by capability, expertise, but also driven by making sure everybody is fully employed and can help get the product out the door on cost, on schedule, at the highest level of quality. So I'll say that kind of that composition of words and my teammates will over and over, because it's really one of the driving cultural themes that we want to get individuals and teams of those individuals. Is it's about balancing that stuff, those aspects. So relative size estimates are going to help them produce the best plans as a result. And then individuals will, as we talked about, they may have their variations on those workflows. We're finding, I think most of the time, teams do a pretty good job of using a set of standard steps for the work that they're doing. But Brad, Christiane, I know currently you guys may have some variations on that you'll talk about in each of the modules that you're going to be giving us more and more detail on coming up shortly. So it's all about workflow, distribution, and size estimates. Putting that all together, we come up with the best plans at the individual level and rolling it up for the entire project to do the best job of on cost, on schedule, and the best of quality. What happens after the launch? Well, that's when everybody goes to the individual plans, And what do? They all pick the first thing on their process or on their task list, and they start doing their work. They're going to collect data, often using the process dashboard tool or maybe another tool that they've selected. But that's what we offer them. They will collect that data, complete that work, mark it as complete, and be able to, at a moment's notice, be able to say, how am I doing? How's everything going individually and rolled up as a team? So it's really everybody doing their best with a good work-life balance to aggressively make those goals become achieved. So everybody needs to be able to share within their team how they're doing. The team as a whole then can produce and report outside of the team without attribution. How is the overall project going? And do it anytime on a regularly scheduled as the sponsor may request or as the team may see fit to deliver that kind of status. So for some teams, it's weekly or monthly, but they'll have variations. There, of course, are some functionality of the team itself operating effectively and efficiently. So some roles are established, and like I said, periodic status meetings, daily, weekly, whatever they may choose, are going to be used along with some steps. What we mean by mechanisms. In other words, just another set of steps or a process for how does the team communicate effectively on some regularly established basis. So here are some of those key roles that drive the team being successful in just managing itself and the work that it's doing. There's always somebody that's appointed as leading the team, not telling everybody what to do, but just being able to go around, tap everyone on the shoulder, you know, in some way and say, how's it going? Any challenges, anything we can help with, etc. All of the things that are listed here in this bulletized list and more as makes sense for the team. And they'll decide a lot of that for themselves. With experience, they will get very good at this and it becomes second nature to what a team leader will do in that aspect. And then there's some other key parts of what a team is composed of in terms of not the work it's doing so much as the way it runs itself. So there are support roles. In TPI, we chose to call these coordinators, not people that are managing, telling others what to do, but these are the go-to people for things like, hey, I need to make a change to the plan because I've discovered this aspect of the work I was assigned as an individual. What do we do about that? If it's a high priority pop-up, we may decide with the help of one of these coordinators, like a planning coordinator, we'll deal with it right now because it's that important, or we'll talk about it at our regularly scheduled meeting. Just one little deep dive into how that coordination role may work. Some teams are large enough, they'll have a separate person that's managing things like if we need to change the process, meaning a set of steps, they're not working right anymore, or we have a new product, we've never built one of these before. They may look at things like we need to have a couple of key steps for, prep, do, follow up. Often start with a simple 3-step like that, and sometimes expand beyond that to as they learn more about the work, expanding those processes. They may do it in real time during a cycle. They may do it as part of the retrospective at the end of each cycle. Often it's the idea of having somebody coordinating that is a good idea, especially on larger teams. Same thing with quality and aspects of how do we measure objective quality and subjective quality, numbers that we collect for that, metrics that we derive from the basic measures and so forth to make that happen. We'll get into some of that in the quality module. A support coordinator is really about making sure, especially on very large teams, does everybody have what they need? And then everybody knows there's the person to go to. If I don't have some piece of support equipment, whether it's a computer or a chair to sit on, it can be all aspects, but often they'll be key major kinds of things that otherwise people can handle themselves. Technical roles, usually for a domain of a team, according to what that team is working on, may have to do with how do we interface with the customer, with the stakeholders. Often, especially on smaller teams, this may be a hat that the project lead will also be wearing. But in very large teams, we've seen them break this into separate individuals. Training coordinator, for instance, that's a coordinator role that our team especially came up with as for all of the kinds of training we do, who is keeping track of that training, what we're planning to develop, how we're developing, how the developing is going. And some teams may even come up with those kinds of special extended coordinator roles. So these are a couple of good examples of what the performance resource team ourselves, what we've come up with. We have to submit data, used to be to the Software Engineering Institute, helping to make that happen. Nowadays, it's for our own benefit. Sometimes there are things that we submit to our command, to the people that want to know certain things about a project, or to within a program, that program for their projects. Really, we're helping the team effectively make that happen. Test coordinator is another example, and so forth. So the guideline we give, it's real fundamental kind of stuff that can vary, but if this is making more than an hour or two of your time per week, there's probably something about it that may not be right, and we want to take a look at. Maybe it's actually a part of the project that's being done and needs to be handled as task time for that project. But these are guidelines we'll give individuals. These shouldn't be overbearing in terms of the time it takes to make this coordination happen. All these roles, these folks are looking for everybody to feel free and open to provide input, feedback on how they think that's being handled. Often this will be part of the general agenda for the team when they do get together on a daily or weekly basis, and so forth. As far as a team member, everybody we expect is following those key steps. This is what we mean by discipline, again, to do the work as we've all agreed it can best be done, and bring up ideas for how do we make that better, things like process improvement proposals, or whatever a team may choose to collect those. How do we plan and track, not how, but all team members should be doing planning and tracking, running their job, collecting the data on it so that they can report that status as needed in a team meeting, and so we can roll that outside the team to the sponsors and stakeholders. So everybody understands that's all part of the discipline, the good steps and the repeatable ways that we do things so that we're a successful team. So as always, we say this everywhere, everything should be tailored as needed, and hopefully we get that tailoring done at planning time and not so much at performance time or time of the project being actually carried out, but sometimes it pops up to that level, and we can help coach them in handling that as needed. I've mentioned this several times. Teams need to communicate. If they're all updating plans that they have in ways that everybody on the team can see how the team roll-up is looking, or even wanting to look at each other's data. But it's still very important for a team to get together on a regular basis and be able to talk to the data they have and to the experiences they're having in the more subjective aspects of the work they're doing. And it helps them achieve all of these objectives and more as the team is going along week by week, day by day, even at some levels of detail. So the key takeaway from all this was just a quick overview of what teams need to do to be highly successful in putting out quality products on cost and on schedule, maybe even beating in those kind of plans that they've made, at least being on track to accomplish them in a timely manner. So it's all based upon, right back from the get-go when we started this talk, everybody has clear goals and roles, but that was based upon we all have a good understanding of the requirements, buying into those, adjusting those, getting answers to the questions we have right from the beginning, and having steps in place and then plans based upon those steps, agreed to because we've gone through a launch planning process. Remember, these teams, they're self-directed, so nobody should be needing to come in and manage them from the outside. We have an internal team coordinator and other aspects of the work being done that teams will decide to have coordination roles to make that all successful. So it's really about using their own steps, put into plans, being able to track those to closure successfully, bringing up problems when they have them. All of these good aspects of what we would want everybody to sign up to. These are what we mean by discipline. So it's not so scary. These are laid out in some key basic ways here.